Mark Thompson had always been an average teacher at Kennedy High School in Dallas. He was one of those people who blended into the background, unnoticed, never demanding attention. His life was ordinary, his job, a predictable cycle of grading papers and teaching history to a group of disinterested teenagers. The monotony of his life, however, was something he accepted. There was comfort in routine, even in its emptiness. It started on a Tuesday just before the last bell of the day. The school had been buzzing with the usual afternoon noise, students chatting, lockers slamming, the hum of the fluorescent lights above. Mark was preparing to wrap up his last class when it happened. The bell rang early. Not the usual clang signaling the end of the school day, but a sharp, jarring sound, louder than usual. Mark paused, startled. He glanced up, expecting to see his students packing up, but no one seemed to react. His gaze shifted to the clock on the wall. It was 2:20 p.m., 10 minutes before the usual end of class. He felt a chill run down his spine. That wasn't right. But he shook it off, attributing it to his exhaustion. After the bell, the students left without comment. Mark, as usual, stayed behind to finish up his tasks. He hadn't even noticed that a few of them hadn't even acknowledged his presence as they walked out. The feeling lingered with him, though, like a shadow he couldn't shake. The next day, the bell rang again, but this time, Mark was prepared for it. He braced himself as it echoed through the school. It was the same unnerving sound, followed by an eerie silence. He turned to his colleague, Sarah, but she didn't seem to notice. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice unsteady. "Hear what?" she replied, not looking up from her papers. Mark stared at her for a moment, feeling the weight of her indifference. "Never mind," he muttered, more to himself than to her. As the days passed, the sensation only grew stronger. Every time the bell rang, Mark felt his skin crawl, as if the sound was targeting him, piercing through the fog of his daily routine. It didn't help that his students seemed more distant than usual. They had always been disinterested, but now their faces seemed almost unfamiliar. Their voices, when they spoke, sounded hollow, like the echo of people he no longer recognized. One evening, Mark stayed late, going over lesson plans for the next week. He had become used to the emptiness of the school after hours, the way the hallways stretched in silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling. The bell rang again, and this time, Mark couldn't ignore it. It was louder, almost as if it were right outside his door. He stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. He walked into the hallway, but there was nothing. No students, no teachers. The halls were empty, save for the faint echo of the bell. His thoughts began to race. He tried to make sense of it, but the logic seemed to slip through his fingers. It wasn't the bell he feared, it was what it represented. A signal, a call that only he could hear. The more he thought about it, the more disconnected he felt from everything around him. The walls of the school seemed to close in, the air thick with an oppressive pressure. His own reflection in the glass windows as he passed them looked foreign, as if it were someone else walking through the halls. By the end of the week, Mark's sense of time had started to warp. The bells ringing had become a constant presence in his life. It wasn't just during the school day anymore. He would hear it when he was at home, in the dead of night, waking him from his sleep. Each time, the sound would send a wave of panic crashing over him, and he'd lie awake in bed, his heart racing, wondering if it was all in his head. On Monday, Mark arrived early, as usual. The building was quiet, the air thick with the remnants of last week's chaos. He headed to his classroom, but when he walked in, something felt different. The desks were slightly out of place, and there was a strange stillness in the air. He could feel the bell inside his chest, a low hum that vibrated in his bones. He sat down at his desk, trying to concentrate, but everything felt off. The clock ticked loudly, its hands moving too slowly. The door to the hallway creaked, and Mark felt a jolt of panic surge through him. The bell rang again, louder this time, and he couldn't breathe. He stood up, staggering out into the hallway. His mind was a jumble of disconnected thoughts, and the world around him seemed to ripple like a mirage. The walls, once so solid, were now thin and malleable, stretching and shrinking with every step he took. He reached the stairs, his hand gripping the railing as his legs trembled beneath him. At the bottom of the stairs, he froze. There, standing at the entrance of the school, was a figure, a student, he thought at first. But as he looked closer, the figure seemed to flicker, shifting between different forms. It was as though the person didn't exist at all. The bell rang again, and Mark's world shattered. The next thing Mark knew, he was standing outside, the sun beating down on him. He had no recollection of how he got there. The school behind him was silent. The bell had stopped. He felt as though everything had disappeared, leaving only the echo of a sound he couldn't escape. His colleagues later said they found him outside, sitting motionless on the curb, his eyes wide, staring into the distance. He couldn't speak, only mutter incomprehensible words about the bell, about the school, about people he couldn't name. The police investigated, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. No one remembered anything strange. Mark's colleagues simply thought he had snapped, that he had gone mad under the pressure of his job. They never heard the bell. Mark was sent away for treatment, and life at Kennedy High School went on, as it always had. But for Mark, everything had changed. The bell had stopped ringing, but its presence still lingered like a specter in the quiet corners of his mind. No one could understand. He had become just another forgotten teacher, another face lost to the noise of the world.